morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
We want to get started with conversations on Caricom, and we get so many calls every single week about all the things that Ambassador Comissiong drops in to update us on and to keep us abreast of. So it's wonderful to have you with us always, Ambassador.
My pleasure, as usual, Tisha. It's good to know that people are paying attention.
Absolutely. So today we're taking a look at PM Motley's Debt for Climate Resilience swap. This, of course, was a big talking point as she attended the IMF and World Bank's meeting in Washington, D.C. in the last few weeks.
Yes, but I want to put that within the context of the Bridgetown Initiative, because the Debt for Climate Resilience swap that Barbados has just crafted is an example of the type of initiatives and projects that the Bridgetown Initiative is advocating for. So we want to look at, since the Bridgetown Initiative was launched in 2022, it was crafted here in Barbados, late July, early August 2022. And Barbados has taken responsibility for pushing it on the world scene. So we have been using every available opportunity, including the annual IMF and World Bank meetings, to push the Bridgetown Initiative. So Prime Minister Motley would have been in Washington for the October IMF World Bank meetings, 21st to 26th October. And she would have used that occasion to unveil Barbados's latest debt for climate swap as an example of a Bridgetown Initiative project.
Well, our Crystal Hoyt was in Washington, and she had an opportunity to sit down briefly with Prime Minister Motley.
Prime Minister Motley, you just announced Barbados's debt for climate conversion, which many describe as an innovative way to create that fiscal space for climate investment. Tell me, for the average Barbadian, what does this mean?
That without having to pay more money, we're going to get to upgrade the South Coast Sewage Treatment Plant, that we're going to be able to use that water to augment water resources that we already know are short in the country, and that we will also not only augment our underground water resources, but we're also going to be able to do irrigation for farms in St. Philip, because we're going to carry the water up there, and once it is non-leafy green vegetable agriculture, we can undertake that as well. And then finally, of course, by upgrading the treatment plant, which you know was the problem when we came to office with sewage on the street, that we're in a position also to protect our nearshore environment in a way that it was intended. When the first treatment plant was built, it was just about separating solids. This one is about actually treating the water to a higher level. So it's actually going to be a higher quality water that goes into the aquifers to replenish it than the one that we currently have now.
Tell me about the involvement of the private sector in this partnership, specifically CIBC.
We would have had to go to public tender, and a number of financial institutions globally tendered. Of course, I was very happy that CIBC Caribbean had a competitive price, and in fact, they had done the work, winning the tender previously on the debt for nature as well in 2022. So they're already in the space, but as you heard from them, if we didn't have the partnership of the IDB and the European Investment Bank and the GCF, it would almost be impossible for them to be able to assist in this. One, because the risk would be too high, and two, the cost of capital, the cost of the money, the interest rates would be also too high. So we've literally broken new ground by being able to come and discuss with the Inter-American Development Bank. This is the first ever one the European Investment Bank is involved in. The Green Climate Fund has been working with us on a number of projects, as you know, and in this instance, we're looking at both grant money as well as a concessional loan from them to make the whole project happen. It is likely that there will be also savings coming out of this, separate from what we use from the interest savings to build the South Coast Sewage Treatment Plant. It is likely that we will also get money for 5 years back to the Water Authority, and the amounts could be as small as 4 to 5 million or as high as 7 to 8 million, depending on when the structure of the project is completed.
Great job there from Crystal. Now from you, Ambassador, what type of reforms or commitment do we need through the Bridgetown Initiative to be able to see this come to fruition?
Well, you know, at the center of the Bridgetown Initiative, and at the center of Prime Minister Motley's international advocacy has been the phrase, you know, you need to see us, you need to hear us, and you need to feel us. And by us, she's referring to the developing countries of the world, the small island developing states like Barbados. And, this is our central argument, that this international system that was set up when we were still colonies was not designed really to truly deal with our problems and facilitate our development. And so we are calling for a revamping and a new philosophy to underpin that system. And this is an example, because what this is doing, what this project is doing, is basically bringing a number of international partners on board. You heard them, the Inter-American Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, the Green Climate Fund, and then even a local institution like CIBC First Caribbean, to put together a project where they buy back some of Barbados's debt. And then, having bought it back, then they refinance it at a lower interest rate. And so that the savings on interest, instead of Barbados then paying all this interest to some international bank, those savings on interest are now used by Barbados to do what? To redevelop our sewage plant, take it to a higher level, so that the problem we had back in 2018 when we had sewage running in the streets, we ensure that that never happens. And we create new sources of water for aquifers, for irrigation, and we, you know, so and as Prime Minister Motley says, we perhaps also generate funds that will go towards the Barbados Water Authority. So that is the kind of innovative thinking that if you, these big institutions, if you really focus on us and truly trying to find ways to help us solve the developmental problems that we have, it can be done. But there first has to be that will. You first have to see us and feel us, you know. And this is not the first time Barbados has done something like this, because 2 years ago, in 2022, we did the Debt for Nature swap, where we brought on board the Inter-American Development Bank, the Nature Conservancy, one of the biggest institutions that deals with the conservation of nature. And we were able to, you know, repurpose some of Barbados's debt and divert the payments into a scheme to protect 30% of our marine resources, you know, our coral reefs and our mangroves and our nearshore areas. So this is part of the bridge thinking behind the Bridgetown Initiative. And incidentally, Tisha, this is now the third iteration, the third version of the Bridgetown Initiative. And it is so pleasing to see that the Bridgetown Initiative is really taking root. In fact, I think with the putting forward of the third iteration, we're in a position to actually list a whole number of victories, a whole number of, you know, achievements for the Bridgetown Initiative. So, you know, we could go into that.
Absolutely. I know we saw a number of large institutions, world institutions there as well. But what are they saying about the Bridgetown Initiative? These bigger institutions, other countries down the region, etc. What's being said about the entire initiative itself?
Well, I think the central argument has really taken hold, because if you listen, for example, to the opening address of the head of the IMF, they have accepted the argument that they have to upscale what they're doing, They have to do much more to facilitate developing countries. And they have to make their institutions more fit for purpose. They have to reform their governance structures to include more players from the developing world so that we are at the table when decisions are made. And in fact, she was very proud to say that the IMF is actually doing one of the demands of the Bridgetown Initiative, because one of the central demands of the Bridgetown Initiative is a revamping of the governance structures of institutions like the IMF to bring on board more decision makers from the global south. And she was very proud to announce that on the 1st of November, the IMF will be bringing on board a new director from sub-Saharan Africa. You know, so as I said, the Bridgetown Initiative, after 2 years, can boast of quite a few achievements. Even in addition, achievements related to the IMF. I mean, the Bridgetown Initiative was demanding that the IMF set up a Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which was a new funding mechanism that would be much more accessible to low-income countries and middle-income countries that have to deal with the climate crisis. That was done. The Bridgetown Initiative was championing these debt pause clauses that Barbados had, along with Grenada. Well, I would say Grenada pioneered them, Barbados picked up on them, where you agree to put into all these debt instruments that if there's a natural disaster, we can pause the debt payments for 2 years so that the developing country faced with a disaster doesn't have to be thinking about making payments to international banks. You could focus on rebuilding. That has been accepted. The Bridgetown Initiative was lending its voice to the demand that the UN establish a loss and damage fund. That was done at last year's COP. So, you know, I can go through a whole list of things that the Bridgetown Initiative demanded, and basically we have seen these institutions responding positively to that demand. One of the demands it is making is that when a developing country is hit by one of these natural disasters, that these institutions should roll out the red carpet in terms of making credit available to help respond to the disaster. So a lot of the major demands have been accepted, but the new version of the initiative is calling for a ramping up, because scale is important. Yes, you might agree to do something, but if you don't do it at the scale that it can truly make a difference, then you could be accused of just going through the motion. So, okay, so you agreed. We demanded that you set up the loss and damage fund. Yes, you set it up, but then you only pledged $700 million US, which is a far cry from the billions that is required. So the latest iteration of the initiative is calling for a serious ramping up of a number of the things that you have agreed to. But I want to focus, one of the things that the Bridgetown, some of the successes centering on the IMF I want to refer to, because you remember Barbadians were crying out about the surcharges that the IMF was applying to the loans made to member states like Barbados. And when it became clear that we were having, because of these surcharges, we were paying out more in interest than we had anticipated. And the Bridgetown Initiative demanded that these surcharges be removed. Well, they haven't been removed, but they have been severely reduced. And that has led to savings of millions of dollars for Barbados. Also, we were saying to the IMF, these special drawing rights, you know, the IMF has this special currency that it issues. They're called special drawing rights, and they're issued to member states. So we were saying some of these special drawing rights that you issue to these big wealthy countries, look, rechannel those special drawing rights so that they can be used to help instead of going to these big wealthy countries that don't need them, we channel them towards multilateral development institutions that they can be made available to make more resources available to developing countries. So that is being done. We had demanded that at least 100 billion, be rechanneled. That is being done. We also demanded through the Bridgetown Initiative that there be a new issuance of special drawing rights. And the IMF director was proud to announce that the IMF board has agreed that there's going to be a 50%, a new issuance of 50%, an increase in the quota that will go to member states, including states like Barbados. So that's going to bolster, in a sense, bolster our access to foreign exchange. So yes, Tisha, there are many achievements. The multi-dimensional vulnerability index the Bridgetown Initiative was calling for, where we have been saying that you, IMF and World Bank, you look at this thing called GDP per capita, which is really a false kind of index where you look at all the value of all of the goods and services produced by a country in a year, divided by the number of people, and you use that as the metric to work out who is a middle-income country, who is a low-income country, who is entitled to concessional financing or grants. And because of that metric, Barbados has generally been locked out of any access to grants and concessional financing. And we have been making the case, the Bridgetown Initiative has been making the case that that is a wrong approach, that instead of looking at that, look instead at a multi-dimensional vulnerability index that looks at especially the country's vulnerability to climate, to things like hurricanes, for example, and use that instead as the criteria for determining which country should be given grants and concessional financing. And that has now been agreed in the UN system, and the Bridgetown Initiative is insisting that that needs to be accepted right across the board in all of these financial institutions.
All right, well, congratulations. Many strides being made on the Bridgetown Initiative, and we most certainly look forward to the level of commitment that we can see some actual change that redounds to the benefit of the Barbadian people. I want to step outside of that for a moment. It's election day in the U.S., and as ambassador to Caricom for Barbados, it would be remiss of me to let you leave without getting your feel of what's happening in the U.S. election, and maybe sharing with us your projections for what you think might be the outcome in the coming weeks, because we know with their system of governance, it's not as clear-cut as necessarily calling outright winners, as has been the case in recent times, on the night of.
Well, since I'm a Barbados ambassador, I wouldn't want to go on the record as predicting winners and losers, because, you know, that wouldn't be right as a representative of the government. But it is clearly a very, very important election. And the American people and our people, our Caribbean people who are resident in the U.S. and entitled to vote, they need to think very carefully about the choice that they make, you know. The issues that are at large, many of them have great significance for the immigrant populations, the migrant populations, including our own Caribbean immigrant populations within the U.S. For our African American brothers and sisters, you know, we have seen references to Project 2025, for example, which if that were implemented, would be extremely destructive of a lot of the progress that Black people and African American people have made over the years. So all of these factors the American population really needs to take into account and make sure that they cast their vote very wisely. Of course, I have my own, I have my own preference, but I won't verbalize it. But I would just say that the issues are very clear, and Caribbean people in the U.S. Once they think carefully about the issues, I'm sure they will make the right choice.
All right, and I want to thank you for coming in today. Thanks for sharing on the off about the election today, and of course, it's pleasing to hear the strides that PM Motley and team are able to make on the international scene when it comes to the Bridgetown Initiative. It's a very new initiative, so to gain momentum in this way in such a short space of time really says a lot about the ears they've been able to kind of engage to be heard.
Well, I think this is the uniqueness about it. It's not an initiative that just, stands on a soapbox and puts a set of demands out there. Rather, it is an initiative that is constantly evolving, and it's really based on engagement. And who better an engager than Prime Minister Motley, who seems to know virtually everybody in the world. And so they have been engaging with the leaders of all of these institutions and helping them to see our point of view and to take our point of view on board. And yes, it has made remarkable progress in just 2 years.
All right, if you can, grab a copy, read it, so we can have robust discussion on it. And I know with the discussions happening across the island, PM Motley is always open to hearing your opinions about where you think we can go. Thank you again, Ambassador.
Thank you, Tisha. It was my pleasure this morning.
I'll see you on the other end of this election.
Yes.
We most certainly will have much to discuss next week.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning.